So we've been making a ton of progress with Composer, and this is a good time to reiterate that there's DXOS, the framework, and then there's Composer, the application we're building. If you're here looking for questions about the framework or support on the framework, we're happy to answer those questions, but just know that we'll have a little bit of limitations in how deep we can get on some of that when it comes to actually supporting the functionality on the back end, because we're mostly focused on Composer, and we're really excited about some of the breakthroughs we've had over the last couple of weeks. And so we're going to share some of that with you, specifically how we've been able to bring a little bit of AI into Composer, how we're building functionality to leverage the plugins that are in Composer as tools, automated workflows inside of there. And so we're going to just bounce around a bunch of different places and share what we've been working on. And I think some cool demos that'll just plant a flag as the beginning of a new era for what we're doing here. So maybe, Rich, you want to share some thoughts and fill in any gaps I might have left there.
Yeah, I'll set up Dima's demo. Dima's getting ready to show some things that we've been doing with functions and our backend service. So hopefully most people have seen Composer. We're modeling it as a kind of IDE for your data. So it's a collaborative platform, somewhat similar to Notion or Obsidian, but completely open source and entirely made up through plugins. And we've got Josiah here, who's the architect for Composer and has built out the plugin API. So everything that you'll see in Composer is a plugin, even the main layout. And then we've got more vertically oriented plugins like tables and maps and Kanbans and text editors and things like that. It's all built around the Echo database. And so Echo is peer-to-peer graph database with consensus. We use auto merge as the CRDT. We use effect schema as the type system and the API for the database, but we've built our own indexing and querying logic and our own replication system. So all of that works peer-to-peer. But what we started adding in the last 12 months are edge services, that's lightweight V8 runtimes. We're partnering with Cloudflare to do this, where you can run a worker that is your private agent that can keep a replica of your data in sync, either one-on-one or with your team. And then as we've been growing out that architecture, we've enabled pluggable services to augment your experience of Composer. You enable them individually. And so, for example, there's a blob store service that we've added. And obviously, we've got to a point now where we're adding more and more capabilities. One of them is the functions service. So there's the ability for you to create a simple TypeScript function, Lambda, inside Composer and deploy that to the function service. And then, for example, invoke that from the spreadsheet. So we've got a demo where you create a function that makes a HTTP request to a currency conversion API and then returns the result, and you can put that in your spreadsheet. We've gone one step further now and have an AI gateway and a pipeline that enables you to connect Composer through workflows to AI and your database. And Dima's going to show this. The one concept I'll ask you to bear in mind is the work we're doing with artifacts. So artifacts are, I wouldn't say they're really well known at this point, but if you've used Claude Desktop, if you've used the Claude AI model, and ChatGPT has something similar, what's happened as we've evolved the chat technology is we started off getting inline blocks that represent content that comes back from the GPT, say as syntax highlighted code. And then that's evolved into this next step where some of the UXs will split into two panes, and you'll see the code being written as it's responding to you. And then you can converse with the GPT and it will actually update the code rather than starting again. So I think the industry is now experimenting with how within the context window, you can have a construct that is evolving as you're talking with the model. But we still think that the state of the art is such that at the end of the conversation, that construct goes away. It's fairly ephemeral. And what we're trying to create is a mechanism by which the construct is actually the end state. So the artifact that you're creating is actually the goal of why you're talking to the GPT. So for example, you might be creating a Kanban initially in your conversation, and you might be bringing in data from external sources. Create me a Kanban with users in my Discord channel. And inviting to be a coordinator that can then go and look at tools provided by different plugins in the framework to start assembling the pieces and then display that information. And so that's really what we've been going deep on in the last couple of months. Dima's got a demo that will show you our very first foray into this area.
All right, I'm starting screen sharing. And to anyone new here, this is Composer, the app we're building. And as Rich mentioned, this is sort of our ID for data. I'm going to show some bleeding edge stuff here. I've got a fresh space for our demo here, and I'm going to create a new AI chat. So probably everyone here has interacted with AI in one form or another through ChatGPT or other providers. We are interfacing with Claude here, but of course the model is configurable. We have a gateway that proxies to different service providers. Right now, this works just as a typical chat. You can text with it and it retains the context as a thread. And this is how AI generally works, where you have a single thread, and that's all the knowledge that's available to the AI. And you might drag in some documents there to give AI access to them. But at the end, the information stays in the chat. You as a user need to copy it in and out. The model we're experimenting with here is running the AI inside an Echo database, where it has immediate access to all of your data and your services and can introduce changes on its own. So for example, Composer is made out of different plugins. One of the toy plugins what we made is chess. So I'm going to ask the AI to show me a chess puzzle. What it's going to do is it's going to analyze my request. I'm showing here a chain of thought, the reasoning that AI does to satisfy my request, and it's going to create a new chess game on the right. And the chess game appears in the space here, but it's an actual live chess game where I can move the pieces, right? And it's stored in the database. Now I can ask the AI to make the next move. And this is showing that we can have the data of the user and the AI kind of collaborate in one environment where it's all interoperable and immediately available. So for example, when I asked it to create a chess puzzle, what it did is it called a tool called chess.new and provided it with the fan notation for the game, right? And we have a list of those plugins for, one is chess, but others are tables and canvas and other types of plugins. All of them provide different tools to the AI to interact with the data types they expose. So those ones are chess specific. Right, and you see when it asked the plugin to create a new chess game, it responded with this artifact construct, which has a specific ID. And then I decided to display this to us. This is what made it show up in the sidebar. Now, any questions so far?
No, keep going.
All right. So another thing I want to show you is service integrations. So for example, I'm going to ask an innocuous question, which is tell me the current exchange rate of PLN to USD. And PLN is a Polish zloty. So normally AIs wouldn't be able to answer that because, well, they are trained on historical data. They don't have access to real-time market prices. But we can change this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new script. We've added a kind of light program environment into Composer where developers can write their own scripts. So one of the scripts here is this function, and I'm using effect framework here. But what the function does is it will call out an API to fetch ticker price. And each function defines its input schema using effect, where all of the inputs are listed. So the forex function just needs from and to, the output schema, and of course the handler that will execute the function. And just for reference to anyone unfamiliar with effect, this is a non-effect version of the function. It's just a simple fetch call. The last thing I need to do is just to set the function description in settings. This is what tells AI when to execute this function. I'm going to hit deploy. What this does is it's going to fetch all of the dependencies from the CDN, bundle them up, and deploy the function to Cloudflare. We're using Workerflow platforms here to run user code. So when the function is deployed, Now, if I ask the AI to try again, you can see it's in its reasoning chain that it noticed that now it has access to this new forex function, and it will call the function to get the exchange rate. And it can display the up-to-date exchange rate. Now, one more thing I can do is maybe I want a table of exchange rates. So I'm going to ask it to create a table of this plus THP and Japanese yen, for example. So this is showing how your interaction can manifest in an artifact. And we appear to have some trouble creating a table, unfortunately, here. Currency rates. Zaman, do you know what might be going on here?
Why don't you start? Yeah, that's right.
Of course, this is all bleeding edge, so we're still doing some prompt engineering to make sure the AI can execute those without error. Let me start with a new chat here and do a simpler question. Create a table of 3 top executives at Google. Right, so it planned what kind of schema the table should have, and then it calls the tool to create executives, to create a table with the schema, and now it's going to add a couple rows to the table one by one. Right, and this is all done through the tool calls. I think that is the gist of the chat demo. I'm going to go off next to show automated agents and workflows, but maybe we have some questions before that.
Great. Seems like a good time to stop if anybody has Q&A on this. And just reiterating Rich's point that the idea is to create these artifacts, and these artifacts are generated by these plugins, and the plugin essentially exposes any kind of UI element that you want to create inside of here. And so right now we're representing this. You saw the chess demo is really like a very primitive chessboard, but that's not like a chess game. There's no chess engine in the back of that. That's just a data object that the AI is recognizing has a layout. You can manipulate the data both through the chat and also through the object on the screen. Same thing with the table. And so you think about using an AI like ChatGPT, you have it create some kind of CSV for you. Maybe you bring that into your Google Sheets or something like that. And great, you have the initial output, but what happens if you want to then update that CSV? Or what if you make some changes to that CSV in Google Sheets? Now you got to bring that back into the AI or bring it into your workflow or do whatever you want, rather than having that full-time connected on the back end to the live data. And that's the kind of the premise here. Any questions before Dima moves on to the next side of things? And feel free to dump them in the chat too if you don't want to come off mute. Yeah, Crocodile.
I might have a question, just a really quick one. I'm curious how much of this data, the data exchange with the LLM and the changes, are you actually saving currently on this Echo database, or is it basically lost and you only keep the result?
No, the chat logs are persisted. We do not run CRDTs on top of them because they are not often mutated in a collaborative fashion, but they are saved in like a traditional approach as a database. For the rest of the data, like tables, sheets, we actually store the full edit history, which is needed when two peers make changes independently when they are offline, so that at the end we can converge the state and resolve any conflicts.
So just to add a little bit of color to that, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a service framework. And what we've built alongside the AI service is a queue service that augments Echo. Because it might be that you're foreshadowing that perhaps loading the Echo database with lots of ephemeral data would impact the performance. And for that reason, given that we don't need consensus and the CRDT, we've got a append-only immutable queue that is available to the programming model that you can use for many different purposes. And the AI service is able to use that to store the history of the messages, including all of the text and the metadata. But that's still part of the programming model of the developer. So that can be expunged and it's associated with the space. So there's locality of information with the space, and it has the same kind of privacy considerations that it's under the control of the user. Okay, Dima, do you want to go into the workflows?
Yeah, just to set some context. So what I've shown here is developers creating those small functions which are interfaced with an AI. So you can chat, and then the services you provided will be used. Now I want to remove the user from the equation entirely and show how we can build autonomous workflows that react to external changes. The demo I'm going to show is related to email. So I'm going to create an email table here that has from to subject. Content is essentially a log of emails. And then I'm going to create a workflow, just bringing this to full screen. So what we're calling workflows, those node graphs, we made our own low-code environment where you can compose multiple independent functions into a pipeline that gets executed. Everything here starts with a trigger, and we have multiple types of triggers: cron jobs, webhooks, database subscriptions. The one I'm showing here is an email trigger, where each space in our demo gets its own email address right here. And you can actually send emails to a space. So I'm going to send this test hello email. This is our test email sending UI, but you can use any email client here. What's going to happen from the email is it's going to be run through a GPT node that will run an LLM on the email body with the sole purpose of summarizing the email content. Then this is going to be formatted into an object of this shape and will be appended to the table I've created earlier. So if you look at the email table now, we have this new row, which says hello, and the LM has categorized it as a greeting. So this is running fully in the background. This is actually running on the cloud service that I mentioned, the edge, without any interaction from the user. So I could log off from Composer. The service will be accepting those emails. Next time I log in, the table will be synced, and you'll see all the entries from the service execution. And those workflows are built from small reusable components like the function I've showed. So there are like thousands of permutations and scenarios which users can make here, which is really powerful. And any questions?
So the GPT node here is obviously part of the framework itself, but you can see that there are nodes. We could drag a function into here, and we're not going to demo this today, but you could drag a function node into here and have that invoked as part of this pipeline. You can, in fact, also chain these pipelines together. So you might have one, for example, that is ingesting your Discord channel and perhaps then extracting the contact information or the user handle and putting that in a Kanban so that you've got a pipeline of your users, and then perhaps another pipeline that is creating automated responses or at least drafting provisional responses to your users, and create user-driven workflows by chaining these together. And because it's all open source and pluggable, anybody can very easily create a function. As Dima showed you earlier, you can actually create a function inside of Composer itself, but using the DXOS API, you can build more elaborate components and publish them as plugins that then can be loaded into Composer. So the plugins could be new user interface surfaces that can work inside of Composer, new sets of prompts, or new tools that the GPT can discover at runtime and operate on based on the user's request.
And the scenario showed here with the script, this is quite technical. This is aimed for developers. Like even the low-code scenario requires you to have some technical knowledge to be able to set up the pipeline. I think the direction we're moving towards is that we'll have an entire registry of different plugins, workflows, scripts made by developers. And then while you're chatting with an LLM, it can query the registry and pull in the appropriate plugins to answer your request. This won't require any interaction with code at all. Yes, yeah.
If I may ask a question, how far is it from actually giving the LLM basically to create this. How far is it from being a plugin, this low code environment that you just showed us? Is it by itself one of the plugins of the system so that the LLM will be able to substitute the developers in this scenario?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We definitely want to try that out. I know Cloud is great at writing code, and what we're aiming with the scripts is for them to be very concise and straight to the point. That's why we use an effect here, which provides things like timeouts, retries in a sort of library manner. But I definitely imagine a scenario where there isn't a plugin in the registry and the AI could just come up with one on the spot, write it, deploy it, and you'll be able to use it. Again, we are building those small reusable building blocks, and AIs generally have a limited context where they fail at larger projects, but they could definitely build smaller functions like this.
Yeah, I think even adding a simple use code local tool, given that the script plugin is already runnable in the browser, is going to be a simple addition that will make LLM capable of calculating something in a more precise fashion.
Yeah, I think this is what ChatGPT does. They have a Python interpreter built in the LLM for like short computations where it requires precision. But we're also thinking about something more permanent. Like in ChatGPT, that piece of code gets executed and just stays in the conversation and gets forgotten. What we want to do is to have an AI sort of create persistent artifacts, so you said, that's saved in the database and are continuously available for the next invocations or unrelated chats as well. So it's gonna, since the chat is running in the context of a space, the database, you're constantly going to be augmenting your environment with new and new capabilities, either by pulling in external plugins written by other people, or having the AI write short scripts, or by integrating with external services.
Dino, there's a question in the chat as well about the priority, I think, of the tools and how it reconciles with that. I don't know if we've tried that too much yet in terms of it expects a unique ID for each tool.
Yeah, the model that we currently have is that we have a set of plugins and composers, ones that I mentioned, and each one of them can provide a set of tools. So Chess, Table, and others provide plugins. Each one of them has a unique ID. I think what's important here is for the AI not to get confused on which tools to use. This is why we require every tool to have a description on the situations it can be used or cannot be used. And the longer and more detailed the descriptions are, the better is AI of choosing the right tool. Like in my testing, I did find some cases where it does get confused, and that's usually solved with better prompt engineering, so more detailed instructions. AIs are generally good at following instructions, but not so much at open-ended questions, right? I think with the growing amount of tools and having a registry of tools, it's inevitable that the AI will not be able to parse the entire tool set available to it. So we'd have to have some sort of query framework where the AI will query for relevant tools, and only those tools will be available to it for the invocation.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this is, again, super primitive in the shell of what it is. But if you think about Composer being an IDE for like building software as an output, and then you have all these different files and objects and things that kind of make that up, and that's the context window for the AI to build and iterate on this software. If you think about this space and what this space is, like this is going to be a collaborative data environment that you can have who knows what happening in it, whether maybe it's a sales pipeline, it could be developer relations, could be some kind of a relationship development, CRM, et cetera, that's interactive with a bunch of people, not just looking at the data, but also building functionality against that data, and then being able to interact with external APIs as you start building other integrations in. Now you have a root layer for orchestrating agentic workflows or building collaborative automations that have native access to data in a way that a tool like Make or Integromat or Zapier or any of these other automation tools just could never have. And yeah, just blending those capabilities and seeing what people will do with this because that's where we're at. We're at the point where it's, let's put this in people's hands. Let's see the type of stuff they might want to build and use, and start exposing all these primitives to see like how creative can people get. To us, that's what's exciting right now, is seeing how some of these pieces will be put together by folks like yourself. Go ahead, Benz.
I've got an idea. It might make things a little simple. Basically, when you chat into the AI, you're you're writing a sentence, right? Some of the keywords could be picked up associated with certain tools, and then underneath, before you actually hit enter, it could be the tools are popping up as look like hashes or something, like hash marks or tags rather, and you can go and click it, and it will pop up and say what this tool does, and then you can say yeah, use this one or don't use it, and then when it spits out its answer, you will have actually chosen which tools it uses.
Yeah, I really like that. I think you're saying at least two things there. One is that at the very least, we can highlight more intuitively than the COT, the chain of thought, what tools are getting invoked, maybe with some kind of pill, or like you say, a hash, some decoration on the text. But the other thing you're saying is that it gives the user the chance to select or intervene. And so perhaps, I think getting the cadence right, many of us are converting to cursor. I'm not sure how many of you guys are in a similar situation, but there's a kind of cadence you get into with cursor with the tab where it's suggesting things. And if you're in the rhythm with the LLM, you're pressing tab quite frequently, but you get some cue of what it's actually working on. So I like that idea a lot. We have to think about how to integrate that into our chat UX. What you can see here with these collapsible tool results, this is really a debug mode. So I think what you're suggesting is an evolution of this.
Yeah.
And having it more in line.
Think about how you can add files for context inside a cursor, or you can like add these little pills or pick down from a select, you can add which file. So maybe there's tools that you can select from a drop down as you're creating the chat, or even other files, right? Like maybe specifically you want to reference these 3 tables, because what happens if you have 10 tables, then how does it decide which tables? Maybe those selector allows you to just narrow the focus of the context.
Right, and I imagine part of that stuff could be automatic. Cursor grabs your code base when it cannot find the thing you're talking about. So the thing we want to add is a vector index where all the data you put in a space is indexed, and AI will automatically pull that in based on the context of the conversation. But also searching for tools, services, external data, that's part of the plan as well.
Yeah. So I see you've been working in the background. You had it update your exchange table to fill in some blanks, huh?
Yeah, exactly. This is just be showing how it can read data, not only write to it, right? I'm collaborating with the AI here, so I might add new rows here. What's the ticker for the Japanese yen?
JPY.
JPY. Right, I'm gonna add a new row and then ask the AI to fill in a new row again, and it will go off, read my table, do some work, and come back and update my table in place there. So really, I'm collaborating with an assistant here, not just chatting with an external system.
Yeah, and we haven't showed the sheet demo, which can dynamically connect to these functions, and you can reference them live inside of cells. So we've just focused on the table demo here, but there's an instance of this where manually in a sheet type environment, you can manipulate these values of the deployed function.
Yeah, and you see here what happened is it's actually created a new row, and this is just an artifact of this is being very early in development. So we gave it access to a tool that inserts new rows, but we actually didn't give it a tool that edits rows. So it ended up just creating a new row for the data. But this is something that we'll iron out in development and just make those tools as flexible as possible. So yeah, I'll draw here and it provided the full data in here.
But it knew that it needed to do it for yen. It just didn't have the tool to fill in the row. So it grabbed the closest tool that it knew what to do with.
Yeah, exactly. If I decompose this conversation here, the first thing it did is calls list rows on the table, and it has the ID from the context of the conversation. If it didn't have the ID, it would query for all tables in the space with a certain filter and get the table from there. But since we're already talking a specific table, it just grabs the data from the table. So then it gets all of the rows in the JSON format here. It notices that one of the rows doesn't have the exchange rate. So then it grabs the tickers, calls the function I've deployed, the ticker function, gets the current exchange rate of yen, and then adds a new row with the value. Yeah, and yeah, that's pretty much it. The kind of the core of it is super simple, but there is a lot of power in integrating all of those different tools together in one autonomous environment.
That's where I think that's where I think it's interesting to see. Like, I could see someone coming in and building like I hate to say sales, but I do see this being used in like workflows for kind of relationship management. So what's that?
I'm saying answering emails, right?
Yeah, not just answering emails, but like remembering like folks that I've met. So imagine I could see someone building a plugin that just gives it access to their calendar, and it pulls folks that they're meeting and puts them into Kanbans, and maybe it does research as you move the Kanban from one to the next, and then it fills my CRM with details about who I've met, and maybe keeps a running tally of how many times we've met and what platforms I know these other folks on. And so I could imagine folks just getting really creative with how they start integrating other tools and then just orchestrating all that functionality in something like this. And then, yeah, who knows what little UIs sprout up to display that type of activity or the research it does or whatever.
Yeah, I was thinking one of the useful products here would be having the AI analyze my conversations with people and just give me sort of like a context window of the summary of the latest things I should keep in mind based on what we already talked about. AI processing the data and giving you a short summary. It's very powerful, especially for sales when you're interacting with a lot of people at the same time.
And I keep thinking about these, like meeting assistants are super popular right now. And I use like Granola for taking notes, but imagine something like this. It could grab your transcripts, and instead of giving you insights on a single meeting, give me insights on the last 10 meetings that I had with the dev team or that I had with XYZ team, and show me trends that are emerging on the call, or show me tasks that were mentioned 3 weeks ago that have not been completed or whatever. And the AI can see that stuff on the Kanban or display like, here are your priority tasks, or here are things that you've talked about 2 weeks ago but haven't been addressed in whatever this other document. And so having that as a possible workflow, like an agent, like this idea that people have with AI right now, that they're just going to create an agent in some like space and it's just going to go do the work. Like, where's it going to bring that back to, and how are you going to interact with it, and how are you going to iterate with that workflow, especially if you're not a pure developer. So like this to me starts looking like a canvas where you can start coordinating those types of workflows in a way that still protects your privacy and allows you to collaborate with others in that type of I don't know. That's how I see it. Any thoughts from the crowd here? I'll get off the search box here. We got Call Historian. Hello. Brent Keller. What's up? Javi. Any thoughts from you folks?
Question from Ben.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, this is really cool, like super flipping cool. And I'm wondering though, this looks to me very raw, and you would have to have knowledge of like, how all of the back end of this application, and you essentially, it looks like you're building how it runs, how it works. But then could you perhaps have it spit out this workflow, this general behavior that you've just created into a limited UI where it gets to stay? It's more like a product that's all ready to use for that particular task. If it was handling like past meetings or whatever, can you have a UI that's basically just that? So you're not digging in down in the deep depths actually programming on it, but you're really just clicking familiar UI buttons and just in a certain flavor, if you understand what I'm saying.
I think that type of marketplace is what we're really excited to see emerge. And that will be folks building plugins and adding functionality and because basically everything inside of what you're seeing here is an editable surface or a surface that you could display something you created on your own. And so, yeah, all of that workflow could result in some new UI element that you've created. And
Well, okay, maybe I wasn't clear enough. You're talking about adding plugins, but it's still a bit too low in the weeds sort of thing.
sure,
For someone,
but that could be output
would
as
there be like a log?
that could be output as a page or as a URL, or the space could have a public URL that exposes
I think
some kind of functionality.
Ben, if I understand correctly, you're talking about AI creating workflows like the one I'm showing right now, right?
No, he's talking about exposing the functional output of what someone technical like you or us might create inside of here without them needing to dig into the weeds of building and using.
Imagine it like you had some place like an app store, right? And you could bake your own app from doing these setups and have it output a nice program that someone can go download to have it on their desktop, and it's say just to do with sales, or just to do with meetings you've been to before, or just to do with talking to an AI about a specific topic. And it's like these pre-made, cooked up recipes for UI environments are tailored to people's jobs, specific jobs like accounting or like public,
I think the closest we get to, I think it's a great idea. And I think the closest we can get to today is, for example, Dima, bring up a Kanban. We don't need to do too much with it, but if you just create a Kanban and go into full screen on it.
Is this a separate plugin?
Yeah, it's a separate plugin.
Very
Let's
low.
just sort of sketch out Ben's idea. And sorry, is it Ben? Yeah, okay. Let me talk a little bit about what a plugin is, and then see if we can get to where your idea takes us, right? A plugin is a modular piece of software, in quotes, because it can consist of one or all of the following. It can have a UX surface that could be quite complex and sophisticated, like a Kanban, or very simple, like a map. It can have some AI tools that can be functions or just prompts. And it can have data types, and it could also have some back-end functions that could be deployed. Now, what I would imagine what we could imagine doing is, say, the use case that you're imagining fits within an existing plugin paradigm, like a Kanban, but that you mashed that up with a set of prompts and functions that were for a specific, it's not going to work at the moment, Dima, but just wanted to everyone can imagine the Kanban, right? So imagine now you've created a GPT workflow in the background that will connect your email and your Discord to a GPT and categorize and put it into the Kanban. We could package all of that up as a plugin. I like the word recipe that you used, and then enable users to just install that as an applet, as a separate app. Now, I don't know, we probably need to do some more work on the terminology, but the plugin architecture encompasses doing all of that. And we imagine, Dima, if you bring up the plugin registry right now in settings, right now these feel a little heavy in that they're developer-generated components. But we're going to broaden this out into something like an app store, like Zapier has, or If This Then That, so that users can contribute them by just adding scripts and functions and then publish them.
Go for it.
He's trying to unmute.
Okay, let's expand the idea a little bit then, right? This would be perfect for, say, a big company that has like hundreds of employees, and they've got a local internet, like a software that they use in the building, and certain workers have roles. And so, like, basically you'd provide one part of the application to certain roles, another part of the application to other certain roles, and they would have a UI that they can't mess up. You know how you're basically able to add and take things away from the UI in this sort of, I would call this more back end. You're like creating the application. But what I'm talking about is a finalized screen that you cannot accidentally, that part of the system's gone. I accidentally deleted it. Help.
Yeah. The closest model, the mental model I keep going back to is Microsoft Access, which if you're an end user, just looks like a spreadsheet. if you're the manager or the IT guy in the organization, it looks to you like a SQL database. And you can lock down the ability to edit the application. And yeah, I think we can, there's no way to stop a motivated user from getting under the covers. I don't think we want to put artificial locks on the app, but we can create a kind of kiosk mode for a particular plugin such that you can't accidentally or inadvertently modify it, and you don't get those surfaces exposed to you. So it's a simpler experience. In fact, we've thought about how we might be able to publish a plugin that just runs outside of Composer as almost a reactive website. So I think it's a really good concept. Yeah, if after the call, you have, first of all, we'd encourage you and everyone else to try this out and give us feedback. This is the first time we've showed this to anybody outside of the organization, and certainly encourage people to come and collaborate with us and build out these plugins. But that's a great idea. We'll definitely consider that.
Josiah, I thought you had some thoughts maybe.
I think Rich pretty much covered what I was going to say as well. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, Crocodile? I see you got.
There's one more question.
Yeah. You're muted too, boss.
Sorry, I had a difficult time unmuting. What I just noticed that this system may be very valuable for explaining AI in a way. It's like the opposite direction from like building the very clear, very minimal UI to it. It also lets the LLM to better explain and expose what it is currently doing, because like in the state how it is now, we just get the output from it. But if it may be allowed to build its own system in a comprehensive way, just using this tool, for example, then it lets the LLM to be more transparent, maybe to a certain extent.
Yeah.
By transparency, what do you mean?
In terms of workflows.
So you can see under the covers and see what it's actually doing?
It's more like about the safety concerns, like the explainability of the AI. Now it's like entirely the black box, and if you have this like application that it is building for your purpose, and this application is relatively easy comprehensible, it has certain interface, like user interface, quite deep inside, maybe it will be like considered more safe.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thanks for that observation. Yeah, I think anything we can do to show the user the control that they have, and that we're firewalling everybody's conversations with their data, that it's under their control. We even anticipate that we can run this offline with your own local LLM, whether that's a Llama node running on your computer or inside the browser itself, or to have an expanded experience where you can stay local and then for some tasks go to more powerful models online. Yeah, let's think about how we can really expose that even more to the user, what's going on. Again, these tool request response nodes are giving you that information, and we were thinking about that as a debug mode, but perhaps there's another kind of narration mode where you can see the audit trail of what has happened. Even if you're a casual user, that might be of interest.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the Replit agent, when you ask it to do a workflow, it almost gives you like this live activity feed of what it's doing that looks a lot like our tool requests and the sequence of events. And it like actively scrolls you through this thing. And at the end, it gives you like, here's what I've done. Do you want to take the next action? And it gets that stuff out of the way. And if I want to scroll back and look through it, I can. But yeah, I often don't. I often just say, yeah, do the thing, or let's try it. We can always roll back. But I think letting people see the workflow in a lot of instances is endearing and builds trust. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Can the AI actually dig into its own workflow, where it's just how it's come up with what it's come up with? If you say, okay, that's wrong, can you analyze what you just did and maybe find the problem with yourself?
Yeah, it definitely self-heals. So when it uses a tool and the tool responds with a tool use error, it will try and resolve that error. And you can actually see that in the screen share there, that it's for a few of them, it had to try multiple times.
What might be interesting is to have a little status indicator on the tool request, like a checkbox or was not successful or whatever. So if it's going to be closed or something, more of a almost like a status report that you can dig into if you want to see it, but it's just visually letting you know that things were successful. Or you talked about checking off your bullet list before, Rich, in an internal demo.
Yeah, and so it looks like actually naming the tools would be nice as well. So even without them expanded, you see the actions it's performing in the background while it's thinking. Right.
To make it very simple, if it's made an error, just color code the text as like red kind of colors, and if it's a good response, just color code it like green, and then you can spot it easily.
Like GitHub Actions, you got a little green check or a red X next to the result.
Yeah, I'm thinking also that if we can do this in a privacy preserving way, gather the results of the tools so that, for example, I was thinking earlier, Dimo, in your demo where it added a new field for the Japanese yen conversion, it would be really great if the model was able to diagnose that it doesn't quite have the tool that it needs and flag that. And the same with all of the errors, so that the developer has, maybe this is opt-in or it could be fully depersonalized, but we have a feedback cycle so the tools can improve themselves.
You can have the LLM write the bug report, a short summary, so they could verify that it doesn't have any of their personal information. And
then it can ask you if you want to look at that before it gets submitted. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Great. Some really great ideas there, folks. Thanks so much for your participation in this. We're really excited about this. We'd really love to get more of your feedback. And we're going to be featuring this going forward in these meetings that we're going to do more frequently this year.
Yeah, we do these on the second Tuesday of every month. We do our developer Q&A, and as they build momentum, we will plan to branch out. Maybe we do it twice a month with the goal of eventually doing this once a week once the developer community is fully built out and we've got a lot of momentum. So if there's anything we can do to help support you all as you explore this, if you've got questions, feel free to leave them in the Discord. And I do think we'll start to build some good momentum over the next few months as this starts making its way out into the real world and people start seeing what the capabilities are here.
Is it okay to ask some questions that aren't directly related to the composer, but to the Echo and
of course,
the Halo?
Yeah, please.
Okay, as I mentioned at the very start, I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing, and it's absolutely awesome bringing back power to people and stuff. But what I'm doing or attempting to do with this Echo and Halo is I've been playing around with it for the last few days and even showing one of my testers, and we both came to the conclusion that the client ID seems like it's more like a session ID, and there must be something going on really under the hood with the actual, with who you are and what a space is and how to get back to that space, etc. And what I've basically done is, I'm quite dyslexic, so I can't really handle reading tons and tons of tabs of TypeScript all over the place. What I've done is I just rolled it all up into one JavaScript file so I can go through it and see exactly what's happening, just for convenience sake. And what I've done so far is I've moved the random public key to hex function outside of the creation of the client instance, and so you're able to just have one pre-made. And I've tested it, and every single time you have like your persistent storage folder, every single time you launch the client, it will have exactly the same ID, even if you go and look at the actual what is it, the profile, I think, every single time. And for me, this is good for recovery because of the nature of how I'm doing the hole punch stuff. But also, I've noticed something very strange when it comes to spaces. If I do the same thing with the space, if I take the trace ID out of where it's hard coded in there that it's going to be a random one, and I actually give it a 64 hash as a string, that's the same every time. Yes, I do. I can actually go and look into the what is it called, I can look at the spaces. Oh, the identity manager. I can go in and look at the identity manager, and I can see that the basically every time I do this, I get the number of spaces increases. Though I have exactly the same trace ID on it, I seem to be getting an additional every single time I run the script, an additional new space, which I'm not sure why. It's really strange.
That's interesting. So you said you're modifying the trace ID.
Yeah.
I
can show you.
Are you familiar with the DevTools app?
So one thing to note is that he's working on Node, not in the browser. So the DevTools is not super helpful. What we were figuring out earlier was just how to configure the client in Node just so that it stored the data in the correct path that he needed on his machine, and then that enabled the persistence. And
if I may, if I may, I've got a very small script that I can just show you, and you could see. It might be easier than listening to me rambling on, to just see which one I know. What's it? Oh, it's peculiar. May I?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Share screen, and then let's guess entire screen, and then share. Then basically I bundled everything, just everything in the at DXOS/clients. It's got all of the other extra things in there. Basically here I import the whole DXOS library as a bundle, and then I've got my persistent storage just called store, and then this pre-made hash, and basically just get a client with an identity, and then later down here I create a space, and I'm looking at the space's length. I also go through all of the spaces, and I've just marked off things I've seen before, so so I can see that it's doing the same thing every single time. And if I actually just run it, you can see each time I've run it here, just run it like that, and every single time I'm getting the same key in the same space key, and my client hash is as I wanted it. And you can see down here the spaces length is always 1. Come on, load yourself. Yep, spaces is 1. But then if I go and create a new space, which again is basically using another hash, which is the same every single time, and if I go save this first, save, and then Control C, clear the console, and then look, if I go and run it again, my computer's a little slow. You can see it says spaces 2, because obviously this time I've created a space. But then if I do the same thing again, it will say spaces 3, which is it's a bit peculiar. I'm just wondering what possibly, because obviously I'm forcing it to do it my way.
I have I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I have an explanation for this.
Okay.
The reason for creating new space is that the instance ID and the trace ID we use purely for debugging at runtime. It's not affecting anything stored on disk. So this is just the identifiers for us to attribute logs to a particular instance running in the system. The persistent identifiers are the space ID, the identity key, and the device key. Those are the ones that are shared with other peers, and those are the ones that are written on disk. The client ID is just getting the client instance ID and the trace ID, they're just getting recreated every time you run the script, and this is just used for logging.
All right. So I'm basically manipulating something that's totally pointless, is what you're saying, or because the only reason I'm doing this is because these hexes I'm using, for example, I've got on my current application where I'm using my hole punch stuff, I'm able to actually just hard code these hexes into the apps. When they're actually produced and given away to all of the people, they'll go straight to get particular users that are parts of my network that are running, and you'll always find them. They'll always be the same person. And I'm attempting to do this with the Echo, with the Halo, so that there'll be spaces that are hard coded, and there'll be people that are hard coded in DXOS. Is this at all possible?
I think when you create an identity, you can provide a seed phrase. So this is like a normal 12-word seed phrase. I believe that's similar to what Hole Punch does as well, if I'm not mistaken. But you can use that to seed the key pair, and then your public key will be the same. But what I would recommend is creating the space or the identity, saving the data, just persisting that instead of recreating it. Because it is important to also persist the data that you put into the space or the credentials that were generated when creating an identity. So I've seen in your or configured like a specific directory it stores the data in. I believe in that case, if you run it again, it will pick up from the identity that's already in there. Right?
This is another thing that I was wondering, and I'm quite scratching my chin over this, because even your developer docs kind of hint at this. Like, in order to basically have your device or your identity recoverable, you should span it over several devices. This would actually be a lot easier if you were to save these in the core store, where everyone has it, just like I was on about before, where you could easily recover things because everyone has them, rather than saying, oops, I've lost it. Oops, I forgot to make a backup on a different device. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have it recoverable. So in your model, you have, is it everyone on the network or any of your contacts? What's the scope of?
Basically, there's at the moment the way because what I'm doing is I'm building a wallet system that's completely offline. There's what I have, like the seed user, which would be me running the network as like the first person, and then you've got all of the different users that opt in to be like a coin. Like someone is Bitcoin, someone is Ethereum, someone is HBAR, things like that. And you will, when you load the application, you immediately, as a client, you find the root user, then has the list of all who are coins, and the coins, they also can find the root user. And basically then, as the users come in, the coins collect all of the users, and everyone knows everyone. So it's basically like a structure like that.
All right. Yeah. So I'm guessing it's a sort of social recovery where you can recover off of other peers. I think this is valuable. Yeah.
I think we'll probably want to build something like this at some point. I think specifically with contacts, right? Something that we've talked about for a long time and have built in a very primitive way, but haven't expanded much, is just your contact book within Halo, of keeping track of the public IDs of all of the other people and spaces that you're in, and being able to invite them automatically to new spaces as the first use case. But I think being able to designate some of them as like recovery peers where you shard stuff across those IDs, I think would also be useful as well.
Is there anything in here? Because I'm just really want to wrap my brain around how the persistence and discoverability go. I know you have invites, but I'm also wondering, is there anything we're looking here in these comments? I don't know if I might make it bigger. Is there anything that is here that is actually useful? For example, this auto merge colon and then a hash for like a root of a space. They've got a data ID and a properties ID. It looks like every one of these spaces has the three components to it.
Right.
Is there anything here that could be used to access raw kind of access?
Let me explain the structure of a space. So the top level identifier is the space ID. That's what's designed to be like an external ID to a space. So whenever you want to refer to a space, you'd be using the space ID. Now, internally, the space is consisting of two parts. The chain, which is an append-only log, is using hypercore underneath, And that's the graph of credential messages. I think the best way to illustrate that, and I am betting on this working, I haven't used this in a while, but if I look at spaces, let me open our space for Discord demo, right? Here, this is a list of feeds for the space, and I have just, I believe 2 feeds here because I haven't shared the space with anyone else. But if I were to add more people to the space, each one of them would have their own feed. Each device of every person in the space would have its own feed. As well, I have a status of the sync of auto-merge documents. So that's the second part. And essentially, we're splitting the data where the access control immutable credentials are appended to the hypercore, while the data goes into the auto-merge. In the credentials view here, I can actually view the data of the credentials. So whenever I create a space, it's the same sequence. The first message, each one of those is signed by an elliptic private public key pair. Yeah, it's an immutable message in the hypercore, but the first message that gets written is the space genesis that establishes the space and its root key. Then I self-admit myself as the first member here, right? And that's available in the composer with the debug plugin in the DevTools. Then I admit the feeds. So the admit feeds messages establish a DAG of feeds where every feed pulls in every other feed, right? And then the last message is the epoch message here, which references this auto-merge ID for the data. So every space is structured like that. So going from the space ID, which is derived from the public key, you can trace the entire structure of the space and go into the data of the space. And the data here is stored in auto-merge documents. Each one of those this is the auto-merge ID that you've seen. We have a root doc, which has links to every other document in the space and also stores the properties. That's the properties ID that you saw. And properties we stored here, they're a bit special. They add the metadata for the space. So things like the demo, then the reference, the list of items in the sidebar, and some other stuff like the version of Composer that was used to create the space. And then all of the other documents, they store the data. So this is the chess game. This is the metadata for the Forex function. This, like all of the objects in the space are stored here. So that's the collaborative data. And the credentials is the access control mechanism. So the credentials are immutable.
Okay, one last question, if
Guys,
I may.
I'm sorry to do this, but we got to cut. We got another call that we got to prep
All
for
right.
here at
Okay.
the top of the hour. So we got to take this offline.
Thank you.
But yeah, happy. If you want to just patch the question in, we're happy to take the next question. But yeah, we got to drop the call here.
I just wondered how easy is it to get what that screen that Dima was showing to work on my computer so I can poke around.
That's in Composer.
Yeah.
In the
just install Composer.
Yeah, in the debug view.
Install Composer and turn on the debug plugin, and you'll have access to DevTools. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks for your time, Ben. Yeah, let us know if you have other questions in the chat. We appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye.